Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part, a Masonic podcast. And we're your hosts. I'm Greg Knott.
I'm Darren Laners.
And I'm Bill Hostler.
Tonight's guest is Robert Sullivan IV. Robert is a Freemason, a philosopher, a historian, an antiquarian, a jurist, a lay theologian, a writer, a mystic, a radio TV personality, a showman, a best-selling author, a CEO, and I won't hold this one against him. He's also a lawyer. So Robert is also the author of some outstanding books that we're going to talk about tonight. The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy and Symbolism, Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies, Cinema Symbolism 2, More Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies, and his upcoming book, Cinema Symbolism 3, and as well as a work of fiction, A Pact with the Devil, The Witches of Highgate, Book 1. And all of these books you can purchase on Rob's website, and we'll put a link to this out, but it's Robert W. Sullivan IV, and that's IV4, like the Roman numeral.com, robertwsullivan4.com. Brother Sullivan, welcome, and we're glad to have you here on the podcast tonight. If you could, just give us a little bit of your Masonic background.
Well, thank you, brothers, for having me on your show tonight. It's my pleasure to be here. It's wonderful. Again, it's awesome to be on a show hosted by Freemasons. I think this is a first for me. Yeah, I've been a Mason now for over 25 years. Over 20 years, coming up on 25 years. I was initiated at the Blue Lodge, in in 1997 here in Baltimore, Maryland. The lodge that I'm in is Amicable St. John's, number 25, which I believe is the third oldest lodge in the state of Maryland, maybe the second. I'd have to go look that up. But I joined the lodge in 1997. And then in 1999, I joined the Scottish Rite. And becoming a Mason was something that I was always interested in as a little boy even. I come from a long line of Maryland Freemasons. Great-grandfathers, grandfathers were Masons. Some of them, were past masters, ruling the lodge for a year. So, I was always as a child interested in mystical doctrines and, UFOs and cryptozoology, things like that, and certainly Freemasonry. I think my family aside, one of the earliest impacts on me was this old In Search of episode about Jack the Ripper possibly being a Freemason, with Leonard Nimoy and with On Search Of, and a nonsensical story. It's a bedtime fairy tale, but it still was interesting. And at any rate, I was always drawn to it, and I always wanted to continue the family tradition. Like I said, my grandfather was one, my great-grandfather was one. It skipped over my father. But in 1996, this was a time in between when I got out of college, after I graduated college and before I went to law school, the opportunity presented itself. So I took it, and I went through the 3 degrees here in Baltimore at Amicable Lodge. And like I said, 2 years later, I was joined the Scottish Rite. And I can definitely say without question that my membership in the Masonic Lodge, without it, those books would not have been possible. So it's something that I consider very beneficial, and I'm a proud member. And, I love being in the fraternity.
Robert, your first book is quite a piece of literature, The Royal Arch of Enoch. You cover a lot of material in it. Let's just try to kind of highlight what you cover. The main thesis, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is basically that the Book of Enoch was basically discovered in Ethiopia. However, it's your premise that there had to have been copies of it or knowledge of it by some of the folks that wrote some of the higher degrees of Freemasonry, because those degrees came out prior to the discovery of the rediscovery, I guess, of the book, correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right. The book of Enoch is lost to history until 1773. The high degree rituals are being developed in France in 1740, 1750. So you're looking at like a 23-year time frame before the book's official return to the history pages. The thesis of the book is that the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial is incorporating components from one Enoch, which shouldn't be happening. And that's the thesis of the book. I also delve into, how this could have happened. could there have been a book out there? Where could it have come from? Things like that. But you're correct. That's the main thesis of the book. And then I carry that forward, moving history forward. The reason why, I mean, if that's all it was, you could just, you cut the book in half. But then what I get into is that the ritual is so critical to the founding of the United States, and it carries forward a lot of these Enochic symbolism, that you find in the Book of Enoch, such as apotheosis, things like that. And it really, when you come to understand it, it really is the degree out of all Freemasonry that the founders, especially guys like DeWitt Clinton, especially the Freemasons who kind of follow in the founders' footsteps, who are really crafting the country after Washington dies in 1799, they are really relying on this high degree ceremonial to model the nation around. So that's why it's really, in my estimation at any rate, so very important. It's kind of like a piece of lost history, as it were. So yeah, you're correct. That is pretty much the thrust of the Royal Arch of Enoch book. And that's, like you said, that's pretty much the thesis of it.
And one of the things I think that you see in the book is your grasp of the symbolism, not only of the degree, but also, as you said, how that degree influences not only the formation of the government, the formation of some of the other Freemasonic bodies, that Clinton put forward.
Sure.
But also, it's almost kind of a preview to the Cinema Symbolism books. There's a chapter at the very end, if I recall correctly, where you delve into talking about National Treasure and how that is basically a retelling of the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite, and then also the Royal Arch degree.
Right. The Royal Arch, as it is posited now, is the 7th in the York Rite and the 13th in the Scottish. And when I was writing the Royal Arch of Enoch, when I was reaching the conclusion of it, you're dealing with a lot of very arcane Masonic philosophy and history. And I sort of wanted to I didn't want the book to end on history. I wanted to bring it up to speed. I wanted to bring the book up to the modern era. And I thought, well, what better way to do this than to talk about some movies that incorporate Masonic symbolism. Some are more overt than others. Some are more covert. And of course, the one that you just mentioned, National Treasure, I guess you could describe it as sort of the godfather, I suppose, of the Masonic movies, especially when you're dealing with it in the context of the Royal Arch ritual, because the movie, the 2000, I believe it was 4 movie, can't believe it's been, 16 years since that movie came out. The movie is essentially a retelling of the Masonic ritual, where you have in the ceremony the discovery of the Masonic treasure in the subterranean treasure vault beneath the holy ground. And of course, what do you have in the movie? Well, I mean, it's the same thing. It's the discovery of the Masonic / Knights Templar treasure in a subterranean vault beneath the holy ground. They said it in New York City in the movie, which is an allusion to DeWitt Clinton and the Royal Arch Masons. So the Royal Arch cinematically is really brought to life in the National Treasure movie, and that fascinated me. I thought that was really just a fantastic talking point and a fantastic way to wrap up the book, as it were. And I delve into some of the other imagery in movies regarding masonry and solar symbolism, such as being there, where you have the pyramidal tomb at the end. And then I got into National Treasure 2, which also has some Masonic imagery as well, some more hidden than others, and an Excalibur, which is the solar allegory of King Arthur. And then when I got done Royal Arch, I really liked that last chapter. I thought, wow, this is just such a fascinating subject matter. And bear in mind that when the Royal Arch came out, there was really no book or anything that really delved into occult and Masonic or esoteric symbolism and themes in movies. And the Cinema Symbolism book was really one of the first of its kind, where I kind of continued on that theme from the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch, presenting like the Gnostic themes in the Matrix movies, and delving into some of the comparative religion themes in the Back to the Future trilogies and the trilogy, and the symbolism of the Wizard of Oz movie. Nowadays, in 2020, this is really a cottage industry almost. There are countless YouTube channels now dissecting movie symbolism and trying to present Easter eggs. Some of them do pretty decent jobs, but a lot of them don't go, at least I don't think, go into the depth that I go into. But that's, of course, me saying that. But like I said, in 2012, 2014, when the first movie book was released, there was really no other books that really fleshed out a lot of the arcane, deeper meanings in movies. There may be one or two that talked about it being like, the products of the Illuminati or something like that. But the end chapter of the Royal Arch and the first movie book I produced was really, I believe, the first of their kind. Like I said, nowadays in 2020, this has become a complete cottage industry. I mean, I could show you literally countless YouTube channels talking about this. I mean, some of them are really nonsensical. I mean, some of them are just flat out stupid, but some of them, do have a better understanding of the material. But at any rate, the end chapter of the Royal Arch definitely led to the cinema book. And then just to wrap up, of course, you can't talk about every movie. So then I released Cinema Symbolism 2, and I'm getting ready. And then I released Pact with the Devil, which you mentioned, which was my first work of fiction. Right now, sitting here in July of 2020, I'm getting ready to release my third movie book, which is called, appropriately, Cinema Symbolism 3. That book will be released in October of 2020. And again, we're dealing with a whole new slate of movies, and I'm really looking forward to releasing it and returning to the radio podcast scene, as it were.
Like you said, that National Treasure, basically it's a retelling of the Royal Arch degree in York Rite and the 13th degree in both jurisdictions of the Scottish Rite. But how does it relate to Oak Island?
Right. Well, this is now a new subject that's being talked about, and that's surfacing now. Was that, and as we were talking about before the show began, I was just on a show that aired on the History Channel called Digging Down, talking about this. Well, now the theory is that the treasure buried at Oak Island is not necessarily pirate treasure, which was pretty much the general thought all along. Now they're thinking that this is somehow related to the Knights Templar, and this could be buried there, the treasure related to the Knights Templar. This is, of course, what they would have found or discovered in the Holy Land, brought back to Europe with them. Whatever this information or treasure was, we don't know for certain. All we know is they come back to Europe. All these Gothic cathedrals pop up all over the place. Of course, they're suppressed in 1307. They go underground. They apparently take refuge in Scotland. And at some point in time, the theory is that they visited the New World pre-Columbus. And on Oak Island, they hid this treasure there. Whatever it may be, we just don't know. I mean, we could speculate on that all night. It could be monetary treasure, gold. It could be wisdom, Kabbalistic information. We just don't know. And there is, when you start breaking this down, the reason people are thinking this is, and this is what I was on the show talking about, is there are some very startling nexuses to the treasure vault on Oak Island and this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. I can't sit here and tell you for certain that this is the case. No one can say that because this is still in its early stages, but there are without question some uncanny parallels between the Royal Arch degree and the treasure at Oak Island. So, for example, the surface treasure or the surface covering runs parallel. It's like a slab which it runs parallel with in the ritual. Of course, the granddaddy of them all is that the treasure vault on Oak Island is apparently concealed under 9 vaults. And this is the way it is in the ritual. There are 7 arches or vaults that the treasure vault, that the ultimate treasure vault is concealed within in the Royal Arch ceremonial. Of course, in the ritual, there is the discovery of Hiram Abiff's keystone, which has strange hieroglyphs on it. And then we have a slab being found in the treasure vault in the money pit, which also has strange hieroglyphs on it. So there is this parallel between these two between the ritual and the Oak Island treasure. And like I said, it's still in its early stages. I mean, I can't come on here and say for certain, no, that is definitely the case. But I can say that there are, without question, parallels between the ritual and this Oak Island treasure vault. And I think that the parallels are worth investigating. I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, like I said, I was just on the History Channel talking about this. So it is interesting. And, it just remains to be seen what, if anything, they continue to discover up there. I mean, they're documenting this now on the History Channel. So we'll just see what happens.
Rob, let's talk about Cinema Symbolism 3. What movies or what films do you discuss in the book?
Right. Well, this is, like I said, this is the third book that I've put out, and we're going to deal with a whole new slate of movies in Cinema Symbolism 3. One of my favorite subjects when I talk about these movies is Gnosticism in film. This is a very popular subject in Hollywood. And I guess if you want to say the 3, I suppose, granddaddy of Gnostic movies are probably The Matrix, Fight Club, and The Truman Show. These are movies that I've dissected before. And then in Cinema Symbolism 3, I thought, well, let's take an aim at some other Gnostic movies that are probably right there with those three that maybe get swept under the rug a little bit. So we're going to get into movies like Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise. That's a very Gnostic movie. Donnie Darko. Very Gnostic film. Fritz Lang's Metropolis, one of the first movies ever made. Arguably, obviously, the first Gnostic movie ever made. Dark City, of course. That's again another, Valentinian fairy tale, as it were. So we're gonna do a whole chapter on that. And then in Cinema Symbolism 2, I got into some of the works of David Lynch. That's very popular, so I'm going to continue that. In the third book, we're going to be dealing with movies such as Eraserhead, the Wild at Heart movie with Nicolas Cage, Twin Peaks. That's a very intense study. There is so much going on in that. I mean, you could write a book. I mean, you could write a book on that stuff alone. Then we're going to be getting into some more of the Star Wars material. When the last book was written, they just started releasing the latest episodes. So I'm going to get into episode 7, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi movie, Rogue One. I'll be dealing with some of those. Then, of course, the monomyth. That's always a very popular subject matter. I've broken it down with regard to the Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. So I'm continuing that theme with the Hobbit movies that were released in the 2010s. I break all three of those down. And then we're going to get into some movies that have been released more recently. And this is probably what slowed the publishing of the book down. I recently, at the end of the year last year and into early 2020, in January of 20, I finally got to watch Midsommar and Hereditary, which are the two Ari Aster movies, and then Joker, of course, with Joaquin Phoenix. I mean, and all three of those are just overloaded with esoteric themes and symbolism and all kind of stuff. And at that point in time, in January of 2020, the book was pretty much done. And I sat back and I wrestled with this for about 2 or 3 weeks. I just kind of made a decision finally. I thought, no, Joker and Midsommar are just too overloaded with stuff. So I decided to incorporate those into the book. And that took about 2 months to do. So that slowed everything up. If I hadn't done that, the book would have probably been out by now. But I decided, and I wanted to include Hereditary, but I thought, no, that'll just slow it up too much. So I decided to include Midsommar and Joker movie with Phoenix, two movies again that are just overloaded with all sorts of occult imagery and themes and references to other movies and drawing upon archetypes, all kind of stuff. That's kind of what delayed the book a little bit. Those are some of the movies. I'm trying to think some of the other ones that we're going to get into. My goodness, it's just so many of them. This always happens. I always get asked this question, give me a preview of the books, and I always seem to draw a blank on them. We're going to get into some of the horror movies, of course. We're going to get into the new Suspiria movie that was released in 2018, the latest Halloween movie, which was also released in 2018. So yeah, that's a pretty good preview. Like I said, the book, it's wrapping up now. I'm just going through it and making some final adjustments to it, some final, rearrangements, making sure everything looks okay. I gotta, double check the footnotes, make sure that's proper, the bibliography and all that. And, as I sit here today with you, the book should be released. I don't see it coming out any later than October of 2020. I think it'll be out by then.
I personally look forward to it. Your books are some of my favorite books to read. I know you deal quite a bit with Kubrick, and here's a little trivia for you. Greg and myself work at the University of Illinois in Urbana, Illinois, also Champaign, Illinois, and there's a character in a Kubrick movie that was born in Urbana. Can you tell me what character that is?
It's in one of Kubrick's movies, so it has to be one of his more recent ones, I suppose. He's got so many, though. I mean, it could be something from The Killing. I don't know. I mean, I'll just take a wild guess and just say Jack Torrance, but I have no idea.
No, so it's actually HAL. The HAL 9000 was made at the HAL plant in Urbana, Illinois, which is now, I think, actually the Accelerated Computer Laboratory, if I remember correctly. But it's still that laboratory still exists on campus.
Oh, excellent. Kubrick's always a interesting one. I really like analyzing his films. He's really an expert with it. What I like about Kubrick is, he picks and chooses. He doesn't use the same theme over and over again. He knows when to use this and when to use that. The one movie that I've analyzed The Shining before, and I did Eyes Wide Shut. The one movie that I watched of his that I was kind of very blown away by, and I talk about it in the new book, was Lolita, which came out in 1963. And what's so unusual about that movie, it's not one of the ones you think of when you think of a Kubrick film. I mean, it's one of his movies, so it's not one of the ones you think of when you think of, 2001, The Shining, Eyes Wide Shut, that grouping. But Lolita is really exceptional because if you sit there and watch that movie is almost a roadmap for the rest of his career. You will see in that movie all sorts of things that pop up in his later works. It's really uncanny. I don't know if it's just synchronicity, if it's a coincidence. I mean, I don't think Kubrick could see the future, but it's really amazing when you sit down and watch Lolita, how many references you will see. It's like, oh, I remember that from Full Metal Jacket, or there's something that relates to The Shining, or, oh, look, that's something that ties into Clockwork Orange years later. Very strange. Not sure how it can be accounted for, but it's in there nevertheless.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been a while since I've watched Lolita, so I'll have to queue it up and take a look-see at it.
So when you're watching a movie, do you have a method for how you're breaking it down? I know each movie's different. Probably after a while, you've done such a great job of in-depth research, you probably kind of mind how you watch a movie and what you're looking for and how you break it. Where do you start? I guess you know what I'm.
Yeah, I understand the question. I do have a methodology to this. I guess I don't mind answering your question as best I can. Some of this, as they would say, is trade secrets. I don't want to give away my full methodology. When I watch a movie, it's one of those things for me. For starters, I'll say this. I usually have to see it more than once to really get a good handle on it. The more I watch it, the more I will start to pick up on things. And it usually starts greater and then goes smaller. If I could get a general overview of what this picture is going for, if anything, not every movie has this, then I can start keying in on the specifics. And that, when I get the general crux of what they're going for, and sometimes it's multifaceted, sometimes it's more than one thing, then I can kind of start. It's like a keying off. Once I see what they're going for, then I get, okay, now I know what to look for. Now I'm, keeping an eye out for this. It's like Kubrick. I'll give you a perfect example with this. It's like Kubrick with The Shining. That whole movie is nothing but repetition. That's all it is. It's just him repeating these tropes, double tropes, things relating to the doubles over and over and over again. That's all he does in that movie. It's just constantly is repeating tropes related to the number two, or doubles. That's all he does over and over and over again. Once I realize that, then I start looking for it. Then I can really zone in and start keying on this stuff. So for me, it's once I see kind of what the guy's going for, then I can start zoning in on it. Like for example, I'll give you a couple examples on this. One of the two of the movies that doing in the new book, one of them is Pan's Labyrinth by Del Toro, and he does a lot in his movies. And in Pan's Labyrinth, there's a very subtle underlying theme of disobedience, almost as disobedience as sort of revelation, and you'll see it in there. And I picked up on it, but then when I watched it again recently the other day. I actually watched it, I think, about 3 days ago, and I picked up on something again with it because I knew what to look for. And another movie that I take on in the new book is The House with the Clock in Its Walls. That's a very interesting movie because there is astrological motifs all over this thing from start to finish. And you can pick up on it a little bit, but it's in the movie, but I get the impression when I watch it that I don't know if it's in there intentionally or if they were lifting it from the book and didn't know what they were really doing. It looks to me like when I watch the movie, it's there, but I can't quite piece it together how intentional it is. If it's in the book, I've never read the book. If it's in the book and it really didn't translate as well, or if it's intentional, maybe this is all they wanted to put in it. Because the astrological motifs relate to the story about the end of the world, specifically the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. So my methodology is, part of it is, I'm not going to give away everything, but part of it is when I'm observing a movie is to kind of go bigger and then start big and then go small to see what the general context of it is. And that's something else that's critical to when I do this. And I'm actually getting into this in the new book is this whole idea of context. And this comes from me being a lawyer. And I can't stress this enough because this is the one thing that kind of, it doesn't stick in my craw, but when I hear other people doing this and talking about movies and trying to analyze it, they can't wrap their heads around this. And that is the idea of the context in which a symbol or a theme is presented. I cannot stress how important this is. And the reason I say it's important is because one symbol or one number or one motif in one movie, if it turns up in another movie, could have an equally important meaning, but a different meaning. And I get asked this all the time. Well, how do you tell? How do you tell? Well, you have to look at the surrounding circumstances. And this comes from me being a lawyer. When you're presented with a fact pattern, you have to look at the surrounding circumstances to determine what's going on. There are so many researchers on this who just see something and say, oh, well, this is it across the board. You know, if you see it here, it's this. No. You have to look at the context in which it's presented, because something in one context could be this, and in another context, it could be that. So I'm constantly in the new book, I'm really stressing this when I get into my analysis. So that's part of my methodology at any rate.
I'd have to agree. Your legal training probably it takes you to such a depth of research. You train your mind to look at things like that. And, you know, I think your point's spot on about, you know, somebody sees a symbol and, oh, that's always what it means. Well, no.
Right.
And in so many ways, the social media and the internet make people lazy and don't go out and do the in-depth research that you do. I see it all the time in things. People, you know, they just, well, of course, social media just amplifies this.
Yeah.
You know, you see something and just makes people just be ridiculous and don't do their homework. And,
I agree with you.
And so I think, you know, I got your book here in Kindle, the Royal Ark of Enoch Royal Arch of Enoch. And just, I can tell you have done your homework and you've done it. And that's why I asked you about, you know, a methodology, not that, just the fact that you have one. I think that's what's important. And that's what, to me, adds the credibility of the research you're doing. It's not just hey, I spent a weekend looking on Google and finding these things. You have put in the time to bring out not only the meaning, but the other, I would call them add-ons, you know, in history. And, that's what, just glancing through your, you know, but you can just see it. It's so obvious that you've used your legal training and other things, to do that work. And, it's just very impressive.
Well, thank you for that. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, if you read the Masonic authors who talk about this, like Mackey and, Albert Pike and, Manly P. Hall, they say the same thing over and over again, that when it comes to symbolism, it has multiple meanings. It's multi-layered. It is not a flat answer. You know, if you see something in a movie that has an esoteric meaning, don't just assume that if you see it in another movie that it's conveying that same meaning. You have to look at the circumstances. It could be, but it could also be trying to convey something else. And that's something that's very critical to my research is pointing out those little attentions to detail, as it were. That's very critical to me. So, you know, I appreciate your words. That means a lot to me, because when I hear that means at least I know I'm on the right path, and I feel like I'm doing a good job with.
Let me throw you one more out there just that kind of tags onto that. And it's more higher level, but why do you think people are so fascinated by symbolism?
I think one of the reasons that it is for me, at any rate, is that it's concrete. You can get an answer from it. And I've been asked that question before, and it's a very good question you ask. And I'll put it to you like this. You know, when you're dealing with the supernatural or the occult or UFOs or cryptozoology, you're always left with something to the effect of this, you know, is it a UFO or is it a hoax? Is it, you know, a UFO or is it the planet Venus? You know, is the guy a hoaxer or is he telling the truth? Did the person really see a ghost or was he, you know, having a panic attack? Is it really the Loch Ness Monster or is it a boat with a dummy on the end of it? You know, is it Bigfoot or is it a guy running around in a gorilla suit? You know, there's always that question of, you know, is it a hoax? Is it real? Is it not real? How's the credibility of the guy, you know, making the accusation or the assertion of it? You always are left with a question of doubt, as it were. If you queue up The Shining right now, I can show you all this. I mean, there it is. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, I can show you why in Black Swan, the date February 12th appears on the poster. If you watch The Shining, I can show you where the number 42 repeats. I could show you the astrological symbolism in a house with a clock in its wall. I mean, I can show it to you. There is no ifs, ands, or buts that the date of February 12th doesn't appear on a poster in Black Swan that is designed to conjure the birthday of Anna Pavlova. I could show you repetition in The Shining that is without question there. You know, I can show you, I can point out to you the Gnostic themes in the Matrix movies. You know, I could show you, you know, this, that, and the other in these. It's concrete. I can show it to you. I mean, it's there. I can explain, if you want to get into, more of it in a practical, in the Royal Arch standpoint, I could I offer you explanation as to why the United States Capitol building has a dome on it, or why Minerva is on the seal of Union College of Schenectady, New York. I can explain it to you and say, this is why it's there. There's less ambiguity with it. And I think that's, in my opinion, why it makes it such a fascinating study is you can show it to somebody and say, there it is. It's not like showing somebody a picture or YouTube video of what purports to be a ghost. Well, I don't know. I mean, is there someone standing behind the scenes doing something that I can't see? If I cue you up Kubrick's The Shining, I mean, I could sit here and pause it and go back and forth with you for 3 hours showing you every little piece of repetition in it that is irrefutable. So that's why it's so fascinating to me. And I think that's why it holds such a fascination. There's less ambiguity with it.
Do you think symbolism happens on purpose? Is it through the subconscious? Is it just by chance? And I mean, you've kind of given examples of the movies, which are obviously developed by authors, either from a book or from a movie script or both, or physical structures in architecture. I mean, I assume some's on purpose, but do you think in general, as humans, we plan these things, or are we somehow wired and they come out in our thought processes?
Well, this is a question that I really wrestle with in the books. I believe, I mean, again, you have to look at it in a individual context. I think many movies it's intentional. Like The Shining. I mean, I believe that's clearly intentional. Movies like Black Swan, intentional. I mean, if you get familiar with a director and you see that this guy's an expert and is very sophisticated with it, you are more inclined to believe that it's intentionally done than by accident. I am a subscriber to Carl Jung and the archetypes and the collective unconscious, that this sometimes may be guiding us, and maybe because movies are ultimately an artistic expression, could this artistic endeavor somehow be drawing forth things from the collective unconscious and being implanted in films? This is very possible. Some of the things I talk about, and I've talked about this on other shows, is if you look at media, television shows, movies, in the lead up to 9/11, they are populated with 9/11 imagery all over the place. I can't believe in my heart that filmmakers knew this. So, I mean, then you have to ask yourself, if they didn't know it, it is not intentional, then how is it getting there? And again, then we're dealing with the world of the supernatural, which is what Carl Jung talked about with the collective unconscious, archetypal imagery. Perhaps the collective unconscious has some sort of predictive mechanism in it. That's certainly possible. I mean, a great example of this, I mean, I'll just give you a textbook example of this is, well, this is something I was talking about earlier with Gnostic cinema, with Gnostic films. One of the, I guess, prime doctrines of Gnosticism is awakening, is self-consciousness, is this idea of having an epiphany, of revelation. All these Gnostic films, for what they are worth, The Matrix, Vanilla Sky, Donnie Darko, The 13th Floor, The Dark City, Fight Club, most of them, all were released, The Truman Show, were all released in this 5-year window between 1997 and 2002, this 5-year time frame that completely synchronized with the turn of the millennium. Why that is, I don't know. But, I mean, that just seems to me that it's psychological, and I don't think it was planned, but it seems intentional. But it seems more psychological than intentional, if that makes sense. And I can't believe that that's just happenstance. So, in doing this for 20 years and researching this stuff for 20 years, my take is that a lot of it is intentional, but you always have to allow for the collective unconscious, for psychology, for archetypal imagery to be filtering into this. But like when I watch Kubrick's The Shining or Black Swan, I mean, I know these guys know what they're doing, and I know they're putting it in there. I mean, same thing with National Treasure. I mean, I know that's intentional. But then you watch a movie like, like, for example, and this is something I've talked about on other shows, you watch this cheesy B movie made by Ed Wood called Glen or Glenda, which has in it arguably one of the greatest instances of a Gnostic demiurge, the creator of a false reality. I mean, I know that's unintentional. I mean, I know Ed Wood, because I know this because I've researched him enough, knew nothing about Gnosticism, yet his movie contains this great example of a Gnostic demiurge, this lesser god, the god of the material world. So in that instance, that seems to me to be more of a subconscious influence than something intentional. So again, I don't want to sound too ambiguous. I don't want to sound like I'm not giving a definitive answer. But again, it really does come down to boils down to the context, the sophistication of the filmmakers, of the source material. Are they incorporating stuff? Let's look at the movie. Is it happenstance? Is it you're dealing with a filmmaker that's maybe less sophisticated? That's what has to all be considered when analyzing this. All this stuff has to be taken into consideration. When you do that, then you can start making sense of this stuff.
First of all, I want to say I'm not a movie person, so a lot of these movies I haven't seen, but I have heard of them. And this is just off the top of my head, and I'm talking out of my hat. But I've noticed that some of them you've mentioned, like Vanilla Sky, Eyes Wide Shut, some of those, they seem to have the same stars in them. And like Tom Cruise, who's a Scientologist. Do you think that he might have something to do with some of this symbology? And could this have something to do with their particular beliefs and religion, like say Scientology? Or is that just something way out there?
Well, no, the way I can answer that is, Scientology is a whole nother nutshell. That's a whole nother bailiwick. Scientology will tell you Tom Cruise, it doesn't have a lot of members, superstars. Its two main famous ones are Tom Cruise and John Travolta. Scientology will credit themselves for their success. But if they release a movie that doesn't do well or they fade, then it's not their fault. So Scientology is sort of this red herring in all this, in my eyes. But what is unique in this is, and this is something that is definitely happening, and I should point this out, when you're dealing with symbolism in film, you are dealing with a vast palette of techniques these filmmakers use. This is not limited to a symbol in the background. You're dealing with wardrobes, with music, with thematics, and one of the things that they use are actors. As crazy as this is going to sound, the placement of a certain actor in a film could actually be designed to resurrect in your subconscious mind an actor's earlier performance and a movie that this actor was in years ago that is somehow, by placing him in this movie, is somehow designed to conjure an earlier performance. That is done. And that's a real fascinating study. And I talk about this all the time. Without getting into the thing, we could talk about this all night, but like Anthony Zerbe in the sequel to The Matrix Reloaded, Anthony Zerbe's role or casting in that movie is completely designed to resurrect his performance as Matthias in the Omega Man. Catherine Ross in Donnie Darko is intended to resurrect her earlier performance in The Graduate. Patrick Swayze, Donnie Darko, is designed to resurrect Dirty Dancing. Max von Sydow in Star Wars The Force Awakens is designed to resurrect Dune and The Exorcist. You will find that the actual placement of a actor or actress in a movie, not all instances, but in some instances, are designed to somehow conjure a earlier performance and thereby investing this latest iteration with the themes of an earlier movie. This is really a fascinating study. It's more than typecasting. It's more than just casting Bela Lugosi as the boogeyman over and over and over again. It's really subtle and it's really expert. And it's one of the things I love pointing out is the placement of actors in movies where their performance in this new movie is designed to draw forth an earlier performance in another movie. That's a fascinating subject.
Do you think that placing this actor for this reason, do you think that's possibly for box office? Or do you think that's for a whole different reason altogether?
No, I think it's to screw with your subconscious. It's to resurrect imagery in your subconscious mind and then to transfer it to this new movie, but it's done on a subconscious level. You will not notice it.
Other than the obvious films like National Treasure, The Man Who Could Be King, or, Murdered by Decree, From Hell, and what movies about Freemasonry do you really like?
Well, I like those. I like National Treasure. It's purely fiction, but I always thought the Murder by Decree movie was good. I like the From Hell, which is it's the same movie essentially, only without Sherlock Holmes. I like those three. I wouldn't necessarily designate it as a Masonic movie per se, but it definitely has Masonic undercurrents. It's Fight Club with Brad Pitt there and Ed Norton. That's a great movie. That has some decidedly Gnostic undercurrents, or Gnostic and Masonic undercurrents. Those two often walk hand in hand. I like both National Treasure movies, very, very Masonic movies. So yeah, those were the ones I'd go with from a Masonic standpoint. Those are all pretty good.
I know you're a giant horror fan, Robert, but here's probably a difficult question for you to answer. Do you have a favorite movie, and why would it be your favorite?
Of all time?
Yeah, of all time. Like if I had to If I had a gun to your head, what would your answer be?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there's so many that, I mean, I could give you like a top 10, probably in no particular order. The one movie that I just really absolutely love, and it's the one that I just mentioned, is Fight Club. I just think that movie is fantastic. I think that movie is all but flawless, in my opinion. I just love the moral of the story. I just love its theme, its premise. And like I said, that would be up there with one of my all-time favorites. There's so many. I mean, I could give you, like I said, a top 10 or top 20 of my all-time favorites that are not in any particular order, but I can tell you right now that Fight Club would probably be up there in the top 3, probably.
Fight Club is an excellent movie, and we have something in common. We were both featured in the Fraternal Review recently that had the theme of Fight Club and
Sure, I remember.
So one of the things about Fight Club that I kind of find fascinating is that there's this theory that the narrator character and Marla die at the end. That actually the film cuts out, but the building that they're standing in is also part of the demolition and ends up collapsing. What I have seen on it, and I've not gone back and watched it myself since seeing this, is that after the narrator character disarms the bomb in the van that's in that building, they kind of do another close-up. They go through the bolt hole in the window and they show the clock, and the clock is actually ticked down from the time that it was at.
I'll have to watch it. I'll have to go back and take a look at it.
Take a look at that and see if you agree with that.
Sometimes these filmmakers do stuff like that to make it confusing, to leave it open to interpretation. If you watch the movie Vanilla Sky, they do the same thing in that. If you've never seen it, I mean, I'll just leave it at this. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about, where they tell you where the dream sequence starts, but there's evidence at the beginning of the movie that the whole thing is a dream. So it's left, confusing. And for a film, if it's like that in Fight Club, that wouldn't surprise me either.
I know we've talked a little bit about The Shining, and I know that you've talked about it's a movie of duplicates. I've also seen a couple of other theories regarding it. I think one of the most outlandish ones is that it is basically Kubrick telling everyone that he directed the moon landings.
What's so strange about this is that's true, is I haven't made up my mind on that yet. The theory is this has to be separated, because some people say it's evidence that men never went to the moon and that Kubrick filmed the footage of them, parading around in a sound studio, planting the flag in the ground. There's another theory on this that if you're going to subscribe to the conspiracy theory, this one makes more sense, is that they actually went to the moon, but they couldn't film there. So they actually went, but the footage was Kubrick filming actors in a sound studio prancing around, planting the flag down. But they actually went to the moon, but they couldn't film there. And the theory in this, well, I'll put it to you like this. It's, when you hear it for the first time, it might sound outlandish, but the idea is not that far-fetched when you think about it, because here's why. Is the idea is that NASA, or the government, saw Kubrick's work with Strangelove in 2001, were impressed with it, and they hired him to film this. Well, if you look at those two movies, you can see where they would think this, because you'll see parallel, especially with 2001, where they would think this from. In The Shining, this is the whole scene where Danny is playing with the toys and he stands up with the Apollo 11 sweater on, and then he goes to room 237, and the whole thing is supposed to, the conspiracy theory is that this is a rocket launch. The little boy standing up is Apollo 11 taking off. In the late 1970s, early 80s, the moon was 2,370,000 miles from the Earth, so that's why the boy goes to 237. It's the rocket going to the moon, as it were. You could even argue that the bathroom is, it's the woman in the bathroom. The moon associates with the feminine, so it's the moon. And in the book, in King's book, it's a different room number. I think it's 217. Kubrick changed it to 237. And that's always been a question mark. Well, why did he change it? And of course, this is the answer. That's the theory. But what makes this even a little more stranger is, in 1975, this is lesser known, Kubrick made a movie called Barry Lyndon. And that movie is very authentic. And it's one of the first movies, I believe it is the first movie. Well, Kubrick wanted to film a lot of the scenes. It takes place during the Napoleonic era, the Napoleonic Wars. And a lot of people, you got to know a little bit about movie making about this. Kubrick wanted to film a lot of the scenes lit by candlelight, but you couldn't do it. You can't, it doesn't come out right. It's too dark. If you ever watch a movie there's no movies that are lit by candle. There are no scenes lit by candlelight. You could have a dark room with a candle burning, but inevitably there'll be a spotlight. If they blow the candle out, then they turn the spotlight off. That's the way they usually do it. I mean, if you go back to the 30s, 40s, that's the way it's always been done. Well, Kubrick wanted to illuminate these scenes strictly by candlelight, and he couldn't do it with the technology that he had, but he did it. And so it begs the question was, well, how did he do it? Well, he went to NASA. And he actually got cameras and film that NASA was using at the time, and then NASA gave him the permission to use these specialized cameras and the specialized film that only NASA possessed to shoot Barry Lyndon. So it begs the question, why was NASA so eager to cooperate with Stanley Kubrick? I mean, the question answers itself. I mean, he was in with them for filming this moon footage, and basically they would have done anything he wanted, and he used them to film Barry Lyndon. So that does add another wrinkle to this. Whether I can sit here and say for certain that Kubrick filmed these guys jumping around in a sound studio, I don't know, but it is interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, it is interesting. Just wanting to wrap up, Robert, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight. We could talk all night, and we'll be sure to get you back on after Cinema Symbolism 3 drops and I'm able to go through it. As we wrap up, Greg, Bill, any other questions for Robert?
No, I just appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the amount of work that you've put into this, especially like we talked earlier in this day and age when there's so much misinformation. Well-researched books and things like that are something that I always appreciate. And more importantly, we just appreciate you being one of our Masonic brothers. It's always amazing the people we meet through this fraternity, and you're just one of those great brothers and proud to now call a friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, it's my pleasure to be here, and it's my pleasure to be with you this evening, brothers. It's been a great little show, and when Cinema Symbolism 3 comes out, we'll definitely do this all over again. No problem.
Yes, thanks again, Robert. I just want to say, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I can't wait for the third book to come out. I also want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to Meet, Act, and Part. And I'm going to do a little something selfish. Today is my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, so I'm going to wish them happy anniversary. And if you like the content that we're providing, please sponsor us on Patreon, and we will see you next time on another episode of Meet, Act, and Part.